The day James passed away, my world shattered in a way I never thought possible. James had been my everything, my husband, my partner, my best friend. For nearly 30 years, we had built a life together, filling it with laughter, love, and countless shared memories. I thought we had more time. Isn't that what everyone thinks? But life had other plans. The first days after he was gone were a blur of grief. People came and went, neighbors with casseroles, friends offering their condolences, and my 2 daughters trying their best to hold me together. I smiled when I had to, nodded at all the right moments, but inside, I felt hollow. The house that had once been filled with James's presence now felt unbearably quiet. The silence was the worst part, wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. At night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. I could still hear his voice, his laughter echoing in my mind. Sometimes I'd roll over, half expecting to see him there, his face lit up by the soft glow of the bedside lamp as he read one of his favorite mystery novels. But the bed was always empty, and the ache in my chest grew heavier with each passing day. One morning, a few months after James's death, I found myself standing in our kitchen, staring at the coffee maker. James had been the one to make coffee every morning, always handing me a steaming cup with a cheerful, "Good morning, beautiful." That day, for the first time, I decided to make it myself. As the smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, I felt a small flicker of warmth. It wasn't much, but it was something, a tiny reminder of the simple pleasures James and I had shared. That flicker was what started it all. I began looking for ways to bring a little joy back into my life. It wasn't easy at first. Grief is a heavy thing, and it clings to you, refusing to let go. But James had always been a man who believed in living life to the fullest, and I knew he wouldn't want me to lose myself in sorrow. So, I decided to honor him by finding the things that still brought me pleasure, no matter how small they seemed. One of the first things I did was return to my garden. James and I had spent countless weekends tending to the flowers and vegetables, laughing as we got our hands dirty. At first, it was hard to step outside without him, but as I dug my hands into the soil, I felt a strange sense of peace. The garden became a sanctuary, a place where I could feel close to him. I planted new flowers in his honor, sunflowers his favorite, and every time they bloomed, it felt like a little piece of him was still with me. I also began attending the book club I had always talked about joining but never did. James loved books as much as I did, and we'd spent many evenings curled up on the couch, sharing our thoughts on the latest novels we'd read. The first time I walked into the book club meeting, I was nervous. But the women welcomed me with open arms, and soon, I found myself looking forward to our weekly discussions. It was a reminder that connection and companionship could still exist, even in the face of loss. As the months went by, I started to explore other ways to bring joy back into my life. James and I had always dreamed of traveling more, but we'd never gotten around to it. So one day, I booked a trip to the Grand Canyon, a place we had always talked about visiting. Standing at the edge of that vast, awe-inspiring landscape, I felt a sense of wonder I hadn't experienced in years. It was bittersweet, knowing James wasn't there to share it with me, but it was also a reminder that the world was still full of beauty waiting to be discovered. Traveling became a way for me to honor James's adventurous spirit. Over the next year, I visited several places we had dreamed of going: Yellowstone, New York City, even a quaint little town in Maine where we'd once talked about retiring. Each trip brought its own challenges and its own rewards. I met new people, tried new foods, and created new memories, all while carrying James's love with me. At home, I found comfort in the small, everyday pleasures that had once brought James and me so much joy. I started baking again, something James had always encouraged me to do. The smell of fresh cookies or a warm loaf of bread filling the house was like a hug for the soul. I took long walks in the park, just as we used to, letting the crisp air and the sound of rustling leaves soothe my mind. One evening, as I sat on the porch with a glass of wine, watching the sunset, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: contentment. It wasn't that the pain of losing James had disappeared. It hadn't, and I knew it never fully would. But in that moment, I realized that life still held the potential for joy, even in the face of grief.
My daughters noticed the change in me.
Mom, it's so good to see you smiling again, Emma said one day as we sat in the living room, flipping through old photo albums. I smiled at her, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for my family. They had been my rock during the darkest days, and now, as I began to heal, I felt closer to them than ever before. Of course, there were still difficult days. Grief is not a linear journey, and there were moments when the weight of James's absence felt almost unbearable. Holidays were especially hard, Christmas morning without him, our anniversary, his birthday. But even on those days, I tried to find small ways to celebrate his life. I'd light a candle in his memory, share stories about him with friends and family, or simply sit quietly, allowing myself to feel the love we had shared. Over time, I came to understand that the pleasure I was rediscovering wasn't a betrayal of James's memory. It was a way of keeping him alive in my heart, of honoring the life we had built together. James had always encouraged me to follow my passions, to embrace the beauty of the world, and to find joy in the little things. By doing those things, I wasn't moving on from him. I was carrying him with me in every step I took. Now, 2 years after James's passing, my life looks different than it did before, but it's still a life worth living. I've built new friendships, explored new places, and found new hobbies, all while cherishing the memories of the man who taught me so much about love and happiness. The truth is, life goes on, even when it feels like it shouldn't. And while the pain of losing James will always be a part of me, so too will the joy he brought into my life. The pleasure of living, of laughing, of loving. That's something I could never give up because it's what James would have wanted for me. And in those quiet moments, when the sun sets and the world feels still, I can almost hear his voice, gentle and reassuring. Keep going, Grace. There's still so much beauty left to see, and so I do. For him.
For me.
For the life we shared, and the life I'm still discovering.